Now that we've gone through a use case scenario, let's close this video out by just giving a brief explanation of what each algorithm does. Now, there's a total of 7 algorithms inside LX480. We've got the Hall, the Plate Room, the Random Hall, the Random Hall HD, the Ambience, the Twin Delays, and Panorama. And the idea of the rest of this video is we're going to give almost a quick sentence or two explanation of what each one is. And if you want any more than that, there's tons and tons of content on the Relab Learning Center and videos too, which are deep dives into each algorithm, how to create things like vintage reverb sounds, modern reverb sounds, how to make the closest emulation of the original hardware, how to make things that sound very 21st century. So all of that sort of stuff is on the Learning Center. So I implore you to go and have a look through there, because it will give you a really good jumping off point to creating unique sounds of your own. So without further ado, if you go to the help button and scroll roughly halfway through the quick start guide, you'll find this list of all the different algorithms and a basic explanation of each. So let's start out with the top of our list of algorithms, which is the Hall. And this was one of the first algorithms designed by the original hardware manufacturer, and it's designed to sound like a concert hall. And one of the beauties of a real concert hall is the way that the reflections build up density over a comparatively longer period of time than a smaller space. And this kind of has this feeling like it's more slowly building up density, and therefore it gives this kind of blooming type of sound that the dry sound gets handshakes back off to the reflections, and it just has this wonderful sense of three-dimensionality without necessarily coloring the dry sound too much. The next algorithm is the Plate Room algorithm. So this is again another early algorithm made by the original hardware designer, and it's designed to emulate both the sound of a metal plate as well as a real room. So you might think that this might be difficult to enclose in one algorithm, but actually the two share a lot of similarities. And specifically the way that reverb builds up and the echo density builds up much faster. And maybe it gets less dense than a traditional hall, but the build-up of those echoes happens in a much quicker time because of the smaller dimensions of the space. Now, what differentiates a metal plate reverb sound, so a mechanical device that you would send an audio signal to resonate a metal plate and have some sort of pickup that turns that back into an audio signal again, versus a real room, is traditionally that plates are extremely quick in build-up, almost instantaneous in terms of density, whereas rooms are a little bit slower. And the other difference is the amount of high-frequency content. So if we go into the time frequency tab, what we can see here is the settings that the low frequencies are at a multiple of 1.2 times the middle frequencies here, and that the high frequencies are a multiplier of 0.2 times the middle. So basically at, say, 1 second long, okay, this 1.2 is going to be 1.2 seconds, and 0.2 is going to be 200 milliseconds. So the top end is decaying much faster than the middle frequencies and the low frequencies. So to make this more like a plate, you would bring this up so that there's less disparity or no disparity between these frequencies, and that makes that overall sound much more like a plate. And again, if we look at the reverb here and we look at the shape, if you bring the shape and spread down so that these reflections build up much more quickly, that's also another property of a plate. Whereas a room would have a longer, slightly longer at least, build up of echo reflections and density, and it would also have less high frequency content. So the next algorithm in our list It's a twin delays. And now twin delays as well as Panorama, I actually like to use in hardware mode. And the reason for that is that the majority of these extra visual tools, certainly in these first three tabs, are not actually controlling parameters that are in the twin delays algorithm. So therefore, I just like to move over to hardware mode. And twin delays itself features 4 distinct delays, each with their own feedback control. Now, the first delay page here in delay 1 features 2 straightforward delays, and the second page, which is delays 3 and delay 4, they actually cross pan and cross feedback into each other. And what that will do is give this kind of ping pong bouncing effect like you often find in a lot of delays. Next in our list is Panorama. So again, you can see if we're going through all the different tabs, there's a lot of empty parameter spaces and a lot of these don't exist. So let's go back to hardware mode one more time, and we can see that we just have these 6 controls. And now what Panorama is effectively a binaural program that gives you an artificial stereo width. And most of the time you can leave all of the rest of these parameters alone and kind of just bring up this mix to kind of give you the kind of width that you desire. So the next algorithm is the random hall. And for me, this is one of the crown jewels of the original hardware. And the idea behind random hall is that in earlier reverbs, people used modulation techniques which introduce pitch modulation, which effectively sounds a lot like chorus, to mask over some of the metallic artifacts in the tail and smooth out the reverb's frequency response. But the problem with that is that you could kind of hear that as an obvious effect. And what the original designers of the hardware did was try and use the tuning of the algorithms, the values under the hood not available to the user, to eliminate a lot of these metallic artifacts. But they still found that they wanted to improve upon this further by using an advanced randomization technique. And this advanced randomization technique is effectively equivalent of almost like having a room that is subtly changing sizes over time. And you might think that that kind of sounds a little bit weird, and why would you want that? And the reason is that in a large space, you actually find that the reverb changes over time a little bit more than you would actually expect it to. It's not like that you hear a sound in a room, and as it decays, the frequency response and the phase response of the space changes in a consistent and predictable way. What you actually find is that due to the air currents and the temperature in the room, movement of people in a space, and various other factors, that the room's response, and particularly the phase response of different frequencies, changes over time. And to get around this fact and not make the reverb tail too predictable and consistent is to introduce some randomization. So even though what you've effectively got is almost like this effect, like the room's dimensions are changing subtly over time, that helps to give this effect that the reverb is not static, okay? And that gives some movement and some energy to the sound and some excitement to the sound, and it stops things sounding too flat and too lifeless. And this particular algorithm was only introduced in the original hardware in about 94 in the 4th firmware update of the unit. So I find this is a extremely flexible algorithm and that sounds incredibly good. Next up, we have the Random Hall HD. Now, the Random Hall HD is not in the original hardware whatsoever, and in fact, this is an algorithm that is the brainchild of our founder, Martin Lind of Relab, and he took the random hall idea, and he kind of brought it into the 21st century. In the 1980s, when the original hardware was introduced, there was a lot of limitations due to the chips at the time and the technology available, and bringing that at a certain cost. So in the modern DAW and on the modern computer, a lot of these restrictions aren't really that appropriate anymore. So what Martin has done is created an algorithm that takes this idea of the random hall concept and makes it much richer, much bigger, and also is much more linear. The final algorithm is the Ambience algorithm, and just like the random hall, this was introduced in the mid-90s in the 4th version of the original hardware's firmware update. And the idea of the Ambience algorithm is to use the same sort of idea of randomization, but apply that to an advanced early reflections program that was designed to blend with the dry sound. So if, for instance, you recorded something in a isolation booth, but you wanted that to match dialogue from another space, the Ambience algorithm would be a good place to start. Or let's say that you have a live band playing and you do a vocal overdub later and you want to give a similar sense of space to the live band performance. Again, the Ambience is a great algorithm for that. Or let's take an acoustic guitar recorded with the DI output. It would be great to add the ambience to that to match the ambience of the space. So again, the Ambience algorithm uses the advanced randomization techniques, but it's designed to kind of blend with the source sound and give a sense of that kind of critical time window in the early part of its sound, so that you kind of get a bit more of a roominess and a natural sense of these early reflections.